I go on a camping trip with my father every year. He's been doing it since he was young, and recently, I've started enjoying it too. I'm 17, and the year before last, my dad and I went on our usual summer trip. We picked a new spot we found on a website while searching for different locations. There weren't any photos of the place, but the map was easy to follow, and the description made it seem like a simple, quiet trail. We left on a Saturday morning, parked off the side of the road, and started down the path. Not long after we began, we realized the description wasn't very accurate. Some parts were really steep, and much of the trail was muddy and overgrown, making the hike much tougher than expected. But since we were already there, we decided to keep going. After about 2 hours, we finally reached the camping area. It looked just like the rest of the forest. Trees everywhere, an overgrown patch of grass to set up on, and no great views or landmarks. We set up our tents and made lunch. My dad likes to talk, so we spent the rest of the day just chatting. As the sun started to set, we wandered around gathering dry branches for a fire. In the middle of our conversation, a loud voice suddenly rang out from behind us. We both froze and turned toward the noise. Everything fell silent again, and we saw no one. The voice hadn't seemed far away, maybe half a mile or so. We stood there for about half a minute, staring into the trees, searching for any movement. Then the voice came again. It was a man yelling. The sound sent a chill through me. There was something raw and distressed about it, like he was in serious trouble. I glanced at my dad, who looked tense and unsure. He quickly turned me around and led me back to our campsite, lighting the fire as fast as he could. The shouting didn't stop, though, and after a few minutes, I asked if we should try to help. I could tell my dad was weighing his options. He faced me with a serious expression and told me to stay by the fire. He said he was going to head a little closer, just enough to see what was happening, and if I saw anyone, I was not to let them near me. I nodded and watched him disappear into the trees, running toward the voice. A minute later, he was out of sight. If I were in his position, I wasn't sure what I would have done. Ignoring someone in distress felt wrong, but we were deep in the woods, and there was no telling what was actually going on. After 10 minutes, I started feeling uneasy. The sun was sinking fast, and my dad was still gone. Then, without warning, the screams stopped. The forest went completely silent. I wondered if my dad had found the man and was helping him, or if something else had happened. Still, even after another 10 minutes, my dad hadn't returned. As darkness crept in, my nerves grew. I stood up, walked a few steps toward where he had gone, and listened. There was nothing. I took a few more steps, and then, at last, I heard footsteps approaching from up ahead. I still couldn't see anything, but as the steps came closer, an eerie, unsettling feeling crawled over me. Just as I thought whoever it was would come into view, I heard my name from my left. It was my dad, sprinting toward me, urgently yelling for me to get back. His voice was full of panic, so I rushed back to the campsite with him close behind. He grabbed the essentials, stuffing them into his backpack in a hurry. The look on his face is something I'll never forget. Pure fear and distress. We left everything else behind and ran for about a mile before slowing down to a fast walk all the way back to the car. On the drive home, I asked him what he saw, who that man was, and why he had been screaming. My dad said nothing. Even now, he refuses to talk about it. Anytime I bring up that night, his face goes blank, and he shuts down. Eventually, I stopped asking, but all I can think about now are those footsteps I heard in the woods. What was walking toward me, and what would have happened if my dad hadn't gotten there in time. I was out with 2 of my old college buddies for a weekend camping trip in the forest near our town. For their privacy, I'll call them Mike and Daniel. Neither Mike nor I were really outdoorsy, so Daniel was the one leading the way. He had a favorite camping spot by a river, which was a couple of miles through the trees. The area was mostly open, with a big clearing right at the river's edge, making it a perfect spot to set up camp. When we arrived, the place was completely empty. We pitched our tents in the middle of the clearing, between the woods and the water, then grabbed some beers and gathered around the fire. Not long after settling in, I noticed some figures standing near the tree line. They looked like hunters, dressed in worn-out clothes with backpacks, blending into the surroundings. But something seemed off. I didn't see any rifles. They were a bit far away, so I figured maybe I just couldn't spot them clearly. I pointed them out to my friends, and Daniel's face immediately changed. He told us hunting wasn't allowed in these woods, and on top of that, it wasn't even hunting season. He seemed genuinely worried about why they were there. Mike just laughed it off, saying he was overthinking things, and we went back to our conversation. A few hours passed, and we decided to turn in for the night. The sun had been down for a while, and the long hike had worn us out. We all crawled into our tents, but I found it hard to fall asleep. Something about being out in the open with only a thin layer of fabric between me and the dark woods made me uneasy. I lay there for what felt like 2 hours, just hoping I'd manage to get at least some rest. Then suddenly I was wide awake. Footsteps. They were approaching our tents. At first, I assumed it was just Mike or Daniel coming back from the woods after using the bathroom. But then I realized something. There was no sound of a tent zipper opening, no shuffling from inside their tents. And worse, I heard more than one set of footsteps. 2, maybe 3, maybe even more. They were moving in a line. I stared at the thin fabric of my tent, expecting to see flashlights shining through the material. But there was nothing. No lights at all. Whoever was out there had to have seen our tents sitting in the middle of an open field, and yet they were walking right past us as if they didn't care, or maybe as if they did. I froze, pretending to be asleep, listening as they came closer. The footsteps passed just feet from my tent. Once they had moved far enough away, I slowly unzipped my tent and peeked out. At the same time, Mike unzipped his tent too. We exchanged a silent, alarmed glance before looking toward the figures. They were barely visible now, but still moving away from us. I crept over to Daniel's tent and woke him. As we hurriedly explained what had just happened, his face paled. Despite all the times he had camped before, this rattled him more than either of us. Something about it wasn't normal. Feeling way too uneasy to stay the night, we started packing up in a hurry. That's when Daniel suddenly whispered, his voice shaking, "We need to go. Now." We followed his gaze toward the trees. The group, now clearly 5 or 6 people, had stopped. They were standing in the darkness, staring straight at us. A surge of adrenaline hit me, and I stuffed everything into my backpack as fast as I could. Without wasting another second, we grabbed our gear and sprinted toward the trail. We kept our lights off, hoping to stay unnoticed, but that meant stumbling our way through the dark. Somehow, we made it back to safety. What those people were doing out there, I'll never know. But based on everything that happened, I don't think our encounter with them was just a coincidence. I was out camping in a familiar section of the woods near my town. My town is pretty small, and honestly, there isn't much to do, so camping is one of the few things I've come to really enjoy. I'm not too into hiking, though. I prefer the more laid-back parts of camping, like sitting around a fire with no worries. The path I took was one I'd been on plenty of times before. It was only about a half-hour walk from the parking area, and the campsite sat right next to a lake. Since only my small town was nearby, there weren't many people who could be camping in the same area at the same time. But this time, when I arrived, I saw a man had already set up a tent. I noticed him by the lake, walking along the shoreline. He looked to be in his mid-40s, wearing basic swim trunks and a white t-shirt that looked a bit dirty. I moved a little farther from his tent before setting up mine. After that, I gathered some large rocks from nearby and arranged them in a ring to prepare for the campfire I'd be having later. While doing this, I caught the man watching me. Not just a quick glance. He was standing near the lake, his whole body turned toward me, staring. I tried to ignore it, but every time I looked up, he was still there in the same spot, still watching. It started to feel really unsettling. Finally, I decided to wave, thinking maybe he just wanted to say hello. But instead of responding, he simply turned around and continued walking along the water. Whatever that was, I didn't like it. It gave me a bad feeling about the guy, so I made sure to keep an eye on him. For a while, nothing else happened. Then, after about 20 minutes, he walked away from the lake and disappeared into the trees behind his tent. Maybe there was a trail back there, or maybe he was just wandering. Either way, I was just relieved he was gone for the moment. I set up my chair by the lake and relaxed for a while. After about an hour, I grabbed my chair and carried it back to my tent. The sun was starting to set, so I got my campfire going. As I sat there, gazing at the forest, I noticed something in the distance. A figure stood near a tree. I squinted, trying to make out what it was. The only thing I could clearly see was a white shirt. It was him. He was standing far beyond my campsite, just staring in my direction. Now, this was really getting creepy. How long had he been standing there watching me? I moved my chair to the other side of the fire so I was facing him, making sure I didn't lose sight of him. He didn't move. He just stayed there for what must have been 30 or 40 minutes, staring at me from deep in the woods. As the night went on, the growing shadows made it harder to see him, and eventually, I lost sight of his shape completely. But with my fire lighting up my campsite, I knew he could still see me. The thought of him being out there, watching me but hidden in the dark, made my nerves spike. What was this guy doing? He had a tent set up like he was camping, but in all the hours I had been there, I never once saw him actually go near it. The more I thought about it, the more uneasy I felt. I debated packing up and leaving, but I was afraid that if I did, he might follow me. So instead, I stayed put, tending to the fire and making sure it didn't go out. Hours dragged by, slow and tense. I never saw him come back to his tent. He never stepped close enough for me to see him again. When the sun finally started to rise, I looked all around. There was no trace of him anywhere. I quickly packed up my things and hurried back to my car. I have no idea what that guy wanted, but if I hadn't been cautious and stayed awake, I can't help but wonder where I'd be right now.